Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, Juan Pablo Cervantes, Clerk-Recorder, Registrar of Voters. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello, and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. My name is Paul Bressoud. I'm the host. And today we're speaking with Juan Pablo Cervantes from the Clerk-Recorder and Registrar of Voters offices. You're a busy man right now.
A little busy, yeah.
Why don't you explain your job and what it entails? I always start out that way, so we have a base to ask the questions and tell our viewers what your job entails.
I appreciate that. So I'm the Clerk-Recorder and Registrar of Voters. The "and" denotes two offices. Really, there's three roles in there. As the Clerk-Recorder, I oversee all of the important records in people's lives. And so when they get married, when they have children, when they buy property, all of those records are safeguarded in my office, in the Clerk-Recorder's office. So we, in a way, in that area, we kind of are the backbone to capitalism, in that we foster the public record keeping of property transfer, going back all the way to the 1800s here in Humboldt County. On the other side, which is the side that gets more attention, is the Registrar of Voters office, the elections office here in Humboldt County. And we do everything that has to do with elections in Humboldt County. Everything from voter registration, candidate services, all the way up to the big day, and having the election, certifying it, and then reporting results at the end of it all.
Now that's the line of questions I'd like to ask first, because it's not your father's elections anymore, it seems to be. Yeah. I remember being part of a CTA, California Teachers Association. I saw Alex Padilla speak. He's our senator now, but he was our Secretary of State. And he talked about this grand plan of expanding voting, opportunities to vote for people, which you are implementing. And voting looks different now than it ever has before. Can you explain the access part of voting nowadays?
So there's a couple of pieces to that. I think you're referring to the Voters' Choice Act and our adoption of that. That's a process that we've endeavored to go through for a while, since probably you heard Alex Padilla speak. And the crux of that is the idea of having more ways and more days to vote, more mechanisms for people to participate, getting rid of those barriers. And so one of the components of the Voters' Choice Act was that a county that adopted the Voters' Choice Act would mail a ballot to every single voter. And now in 2020, we had an epidemic, and that changed state law to require all counties, the whole state, to mail vote-by-mail ballots to every voter, regardless of their registration status. So as long as they were actively registered, they got a ballot mailed.
Now, did that continue in 2022 and 2024?
Yeah. So initially it was via, I believe, executive order, and then eventually it was adopted as just the status quo law by the legislature, the state legislature. And so that was one piece of the Voters' Choice Act that just got implemented across the board. The other components of it are tied to reporting and places to vote. And so one of the ways is having more days to vote in person. And so in Humboldt County, we had, this past election, we had 2 locations that were open 11 days in total.
11 days, counting back from March 5th? Including March 5th. So 10 days prior, or
That's
did you
correct.
Do it on weekends? Or?
Yeah, whole time.
So 10 days prior to March 5th, there were 2 locations that were open for that entire. It wound up being 11 days total. Where were those locations?
Arcata Community Center and Fortuna Vets. Yeah, and so those locations were open those 10 days beforehand. That's in addition to our lobby. Our lobby's always been an early voting location. As soon as we mail ballots out, we were ready to receive them in our office. So that's always been an option, but it's this new vote center instead of polling place thing that's different. And so on top of those 2 locations, we had 7 additional locations throughout the county that were open 4 days in total, so 3 days before Election Day. And then, and that's what we were required to do under the Voters' Choice Act. Being Humboldt County and as rural as we are and as passionate about democracy as we are, we extended that to 3 additional one-day locations in Hoopa, Garberville, and the Humboldt County Fairgrounds.
Was that on Election Day?
Election Day only, yeah.
So a traditional open that day.
Yeah, well, kind of traditional. The other thing that changed is that under the Voters' Choice Act, any voter can go to any vote center in the county. And so if you're registered to vote in Humboldt County and you live in Hoopa, but you're at work in Eureka, you just pop in and vote in the Eureka location as
Isn't
well.
it true? I remember Alex speaking about this. Isn't it true that you can go to any polling place in the state?
No. And
No.
So one of the
Okay.
key parts of that is we don't know what's on, Marin County's ballot. You could be a voter from Santa Cruz and, you're not going to have the same bond measure.
As far as getting a ballot, but if I'm to drop off my ballot and
Yes.
get checked off, I can drop it off at any place in the state.
Yeah, and that's historically been the case. So historically, if you have a vote by mail ballot, you could bring it by. We'll overnight them the next day. And if you were away for vacation and you had your vote by mail ballot, you could drop it off at any mailbox in the country, in the world, really.
Okay. Now
And
here's the total civics nerd in me that wants to know this. You make the comment that you can't just walk in and anywhere in a state because you don't know what that ballot would be for that location, but how many different ballots does Humboldt County have?
So Humboldt County had 78 different ballots depending on where you lived, but really there was, I want to say 76 permutations of it. It was a party primary. So every version of the ballot had a version of that for every party, and so you end up multiplying a little in that way, and so there's a lot of permutation that happens.
Almost 80 ballots just inside Humboldt County.
That's correct.
Because people are voting for different supervisors and different council members, and maybe there are different, tax measures for different municipalities or locations, or some people just get a county ballot. I mean, how do you go ahead and put the ballots together?
Oh, that's a long process. For us, an election doesn't happen, the month.
No,
it doesn't happen in February. We start this process all the way back in October, November. And so people often think, what do you do on an off year? And we don't really have an off year.
Right.
As soon as we're done with one, we're starting to prep for the other.
What about people that are Humboldt County residents that are living outside of Humboldt County, even living abroad? I mean, do you have to, you must have to figure out what the jurisdiction is that they'd be voting in and get them the ballot that matches that?
So it's based on their registration data, and so we have a law in this country called UOCAVA, and I'm gonna embarrass myself by probably getting the name of it wrong. When you work in a field, you end up with your acronyms, and you just go by those. Right. But it's like the Uniformed and Overseas Civilian Act, and so it allows our military personnel and civilians that are overseas to register under this law to vote, and those they're able to get their ballot by email, by fax. We'll mail them a ballot, and they get their ballot earlier in order to account for the fact that it has to come such a long way back to us.
Is that new for you too, to send ballot by email or fax?
No, that's been going on for a while now, and so that's a normal part of business. But we'll know which ballot to send them based on where they're registered to vote. And so if you join the military tomorrow, and your last address in the States is where you live now, that'll determine your ballot going forward.
Okay, so that was a tangent, but I think that's interesting. Think about that. Almost 80 different ballots in Humboldt County. Back to the new access under the Voters' Choice Act. Drop boxes, do they still exist?
They do. We had, I want to say 10 drop boxes throughout the county, and then each vote center that I mentioned had the ability for you to drop a ballot off. One of the biggest questions I get is, why does it take so long to certify? I remember back when we knew the results, election night. And that shift in voting behavior is one of them. On election night alone, we received over 17,000 ballots. About 11,000 of those came via Dropbox.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's ask this question. I read that Humboldt County did a wonderful job, participation-wise, in the early part of the voting. But then I read throughout the state there was a disappointing turnout amongst other counties in the state. How did Humboldt County do on Election Day? Did we show the same trend of interest in the election?
So I'm careful with my phrasing here. We did better than average with early turnout, but that doesn't necessarily mean we did well. I think we're
Sure.
on track. We're on track for hitting above 40% for the turnout. I think we're going to beat the average on Election Day and throughout, but that doesn't mean we did the best, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the kind of voter turnout that we ought to be proud of at this point.
I read that some counties were as low as 29%.
Yeah, it's looking grim. Yeah, in terms of voter turnout, a lot of factors involved in that. We've had a lot of voting happen in a short period of time. Going back to 2020, we had the 2020 elections. We had a recall, and then just right into 2022, and so that impacts things. A primary where the big ticket item was largely seen as predetermined. Things like that will impact voter turnout.
America votes more than anybody, I've read. And do you think that there is an exhaustion of voting, of keep having your electorate called back to the polls? Primaries, general elections, special elections.
I can't speak to that, and I don't think I've really looked into the data on that all that much. I can say that that when we put, when we think of voting within this framework of big elections, of federal elections, state elections, it can be disincentivizing for folks. There's such a big disconnect of what happens in your household to what the state does or what the federal government does. When we have more frequent elections and when those elections are happening at a hyper-local level, when your neighbor is running for office or your coworker you can't stand is running for office, when there's that kind of interconnection with the process, you see more engaged folks. And I think that's something that I think is, I don't want to say we've moved away from, but we've seen less emphasis on it.
Do you get a chance to speak with voters?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a voter. You could
Talk to
speak
me.
with me.
Yeah.
Do you ask them that question about being lukewarm about participating in the process and why they may be?
I talk to voters pretty regularly. I'm a working department head, which means that when you call the office, I'm one of the people that answers the phone, and then I'm out in the community, and I don't ask the question that bluntly, but I get an idea as to how they feel about voting and why they feel that way about voting. And I think there's a certain alienation element to the responses that I've got, that they see voting as something that happens, to them, not necessarily something that they're, actively and meaningfully participating in something. They talk about propositions or ballot measures that they don't understand, or candidates who they don't know. It's hard to feel that somebody represents you when you don't know. Voter education is kind of one of the biggest components to turnout. Thanks for this, interview. This goes a long way in bridging that divide. But yeah, I think that voter education piece is critical for us to not be satisfied with a 40% voter turnout.
When we talk about primaries in California have changed. Is it part of the Voters' Choice Act that propositions don't show up on the primary ballot?
No. That's largely a matter of timing, signature gathering, and legislative will if they're the ones putting the proposition on the ballot.
Wasn't there a fear if propositions were on the ballot during the primaries and there was a lower voter turnout during the primaries that some propositions would have an advantage as far as their passing?
There's all kinds of ways people look at data and voting trends, and and thankfully that's not an area that I really need to delve too much into. The strategy of when to put something on the ballot versus when not to put something on the ballot isn't something that really touches my office. Yeah.
But local measures obviously are on the ballot. We had a local measure this year. Do you see a local measure generating the kind of interest that might bring more people to the ballot, or might or to the voting booth, that might bring people maybe that haven't participated before might be brought in for decision making on a certain measure, a certain item, a certain issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard the argument that that Measure A was a part of what caused our voter turnout to be, higher than the rest of the state. Measure A was the cannabis reform initiative that was on the ballot this March. We saw a higher voter turnout in southern Humboldt, I think, than expected, and so that again, it's how you.
That couldn't have been surprising, though.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I guess I'm always looking to see a higher voter turnout, period, and so whatever causes that, I'm happy about. But really, it's just a matter. I think when you start looking at that kind of strategy, or looking at the data in that kind of way, like, never will it be the case that I put something on a ballot, for the sake of voter turnout. That's kind of up to the jurisdictions and the people's will.
But I mean, people have to qualify to get on the ballot, right?
That's correct, and that's like a legal process with legal timelines, and so there's not much discretion for me.
So what is your choice about putting things on the ballot? Do you explain that?
So there is no choice, and so the process is such that if they gather the right amount of signatures in the correct amount of time, then it'll be on the next major election, unless the jurisdiction that it's being impacted chooses to adopt that initiative without the election. We saw that with Measure A that came before the Board of Supervisors, and so I verified the signatures and then reported the signatures, and then that started a time clock where the board has a few options. One of them is to put it on the next ballot, the next regularly scheduled election. One of the options is to hold the special election, and the third option is for them to just adopt it outright. And so the process when it comes to putting things like measures or propositions on the ballot is one that we administer, but we don't have any discretion in what pops on there or off.
And to be honest, you shouldn't.
Absolutely.
It should just be
very big relief.
The criteria of qualifying. Okay, now you've got the issues and the candidates that are on the ballot. Do you ever, in those secret moments by yourself, think, oh, this is a good ballot, we're going to get some good turnout, or, oh no, this isn't going to work?
No, not at all. We kind of treat them all with the hope that we're going to get that 90, 100% turnout. We administer them in the best way that we can. The nature of this kind of work is that by the time we're close to an election, we've worked, a month without a day off. Many of those days are 12+ hour days. We're just wanting to make sure everything's done accurately.
This year, I've read the polls, I've read the information, presidentially, we seem to have the rematch no one wanted. Is that going to hurt did that hurt voter turnout, you think, for the primary, and is that going to hurt voter turnout in the general election?
Oh, I couldn't say. I don't have that kind of data.
You don't have that kind of data, but you know something in the back, and you must think that this could affect it. And you know what? Maybe that's it. Maybe that's not the job for you because you're just putting together the ballots, but maybe that's the job for parties to think we need to excite people more.
And that's absolutely it. One of the things that, one of the conversations I had early on in assuming this role was with some of our local parties. I'd often, I don't know if you've noticed, but our office has taken further steps than ever before in terms of engaging outreach. We were at the fair, we're at 4th of July in Eureka, we were up at Sovereign Day.
You're a sponsor of Redwood Roller Derby.
Yeah, and so the idea is to meeting people where they're at, and then I'd often see parties registering folks to vote. at those. And one of the early conversations I had is, let me do that. I'll take care of that. Your job is to get people, regardless of what your party is, because I talked to all the parties about this, your job is to recruit people to your party, to get them excited about your platform. You have those conversations and send the registration folks to me. We'll take care of that part. Because that's one of those things that's going to drive voter turnout, is getting folks engaged in whatever way they can. And if that engagement has to come through that party process, then have them go through those.
It's interesting avenues. What you say is something that I think people forget, especially at a national level, is to be aware of what their party platform is. Yeah. Beyond the persona of the candidate, be aware of what the platform is that candidate is standing on. I think that's a very important aspect to choosing candidates, but I think that's kind of a forgotten aspect in a sense.
Well, and beyond that, the fact that that platform isn't necessarily determined external to the voters. At a local level, we have local county party committees, and those positions are up for election.
Right.
They were up
or
for
delegates
election.
that get sent to state conventions.
Absolutely. There's always a way to get involved in a greater way on that front, and to define what that platform could be.
How would you go about educating folks to make them feel that connection, that there actually is representation when you're talking about delegates to a state convention or county committees or things like that? How do we go ahead and how do we let people know that there really are people out there that can listen to them and take their interests forward?
So part of it's education, I think. We don't do as much of it when it comes to the party central committees. I endeavor to go beyond, appropriate. I avoid the appearance of impropriety as a whole, and so we tend to give parties a lot of distance, when it comes to how we engage in our official capacity. But there's other areas in which that we can do that kind of work. Special districts are an interesting thing in California. We have more of them per capita than any other state. They're essentially service providers where cities aren't providing services.
Give me an example.
For example, fire protection districts. Garberville Fire Protection District just did an annexation. They're big. They cover large parts of Garberville in that rural area. They provide fire services where there is no city to provide those services. They directly impact the people in those communities. They save lives. They answer 911 calls. They are that person that comes and saves the day. And they're administered by a board of directors through their fire protection district. And that board is comprised of its community. And if you live in that district, you're able to run for that office and participate meaningfully. We have a lot of seats like that throughout our county. I think there's over 100 special districts in our county.
Would school boards be considered special districts?
That would be a type. I'd call them school districts, but they're the same philosophy applies. Is that they're located throughout the county. Northern Humboldt Unified School District, Eureka City Schools, like all of these are units of government that have a direct and drastic impact on the quality of life of its residents, and who, those residents, those citizens in those districts have immense power over choosing, who's going to represent them and what those policies are going to be going forward. And so having those conversations with folks, educating people on what districts they live in and what those districts do for them and how they can run for those districts, those are the conversations we're having with folks when we go out on table.
I think those are very important conversations. Then there's the flip side of what the party needs to do. I mean, sometimes talk about voting for people you don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know the person on the water service district, right? And but I think that's on the party. Well, what if it's a nonpartisan?
And these are all nonpartisan seats. And
right.
So I think it's up to the people to get engaged, and it's up to us to, engage the people and talk to them about what's going on where they live. again, the parties are kind of left out of that conversation. But some of these districts have board members that aren't doing it because they want to serve on the board. They're doing it because they see a real meaningful civic responsibility, and they'd be happy if somebody else came along with the right drive and attitude and wanted to take their turn at representation. It's just a matter of most of these districts never having enough candidates for there to even be an election in the first place.
Right. Not a choice between candidates. And maybe that's something we should learn from nonpartisan elections. Maybe elections should be partisan. Maybe we should have parties all the way down the line into district level candidacies. I don't know. But I know what you're saying. Competitive elections in some offices are few and far between. Let me ask you about something that I've heard about before, but I'm not sure how it works all the way. The ranked choice voting system, right? There was a ranked choice voting ordinance in 2020, and is it just in Eureka?
That's correct. The city of Eureka passed.
So we have a location in Humboldt County, the city of Eureka, that's operating under different rules than other elections that happen in Humboldt County. And now, not only explain it, but you've been given the task to implement this.
That's correct. We'll have the first ranked choice voting election in Humboldt County, in the city of Eureka specifically, in November for their city council seats. And some of it's going to be very different. Some of our processes, part of certifying an election is we do a 1% manual tally. We hand count some of those ballots. Ranked choice voting is going to shift the actual process of how we do it. We'll still do it, but there'll be more steps involved. Essentially, each one of those rounds is an election we have to kind of do over again.
Okay, so let's explain what it is and then why there has to be different rounds of it.
So ranked choice voting, so in a traditional first to post, your traditional voting mechanism where the person with the highest number of votes gets elected, that's that simple. You vote for one person and the person that gets the highest number of votes wins. In ranked choice voting, here in Humboldt County in Eureka, the more precise term is instant runoff voting, is you select multiple candidates. And so if there's 3 candidates, you'll have 2 choices. Choice 1 and then your second choice. And so if in the first round, none of the candidates gets 50% plus 1 or greater, then the lowest voted person is removed, and then their votes get distributed up according to that second option.
Now, if there were to be runoffs in election before, the votes of the third person wouldn't be recycled.
There wouldn't be another
in.
choice, yeah, because
right. You would just take number 1 and number 2.
Exactly.
And so if you've explained this, if I'm a good listener here, if indeed you go back to the ranked voting system and you take those second choices, it puts someone over 50%, does that avoid a runoff?
That's correct, it would, yeah. Wow. Yeah, so it'll depend on how, and so we're working with the city of Eureka, it'll depend on how they define their rules, but mathematically, if that happens, then the second candidate wouldn't have enough votes for it to make a difference, even if you did play it out.
Right. So I cut you off. The second round of counting, you just go back, and so candidate, the person that came in third in a 3-person race was the scenario. You would go and look for the second choice of what people put.
Exactly. Yeah, and all that happens instantly because we capture both those sets of data when they vote. So they'll have, on their ballot, they'll have a place to mark their first candidate and their second candidate.
Is this happening elsewhere in our state?
Alameda has been doing that for a while. I think the city of Oakland. There's a few jurisdictions that are doing it. I think we'll be the first that does it with the voting system that we use. Hart InterCivic's Verity system is the system that we use, and it'll be the first the first entity in the state that uses that.
Why is that significant as far as the voting system that you have?
I think it just shows like a broader adoption. It shows that ranked choice voting is something that people are interested in and are interested in adopting. If you would have asked folks 10 years ago about ranked choice voting, they would have said never in a million years. Yeah.
But that was decided by the people, right? They
That's
voted
correct.
for that.
Yeah.
And so people can put that, oh, let me take a step back. Would the interest in ranked choice voting have to put it on the ballot in every single city?
It depends. And so how they incorporate's a factor. And so in California, we have things called charter cities and common law cities. I won't get into the weeds of that, but they're just different ways that they organize. If they are a common law city, they can't have ranked choice voting. If they're a charter city, they can't. And so the city of Eureka is a charter city. The city of Arcata is a common law city.
Oh,
so they would
wow.
have to
So
become
Arcata
a-
can never have it? But
unless they
they changed their designation. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my guest, Juan Pablo Cervantes. Thank you very much
you.
for joining us. And we want to make sure we have him back. And we'll see you next time on Community Voices.
Thanks for joining us on Community Voices. If you represent a nonprofit that is interested in being a guest on Community Voices, email info@accesshumboldt.net. Access Humboldt, local voices through community media.